A Life of Boundaries, Power, and Silent Reckoning by Cary-Hiroyuki Tagawa. The visage of Cary-Hiroyuki Tagawa is one that is more a part of film than a particular nation. He has portrayed commanders, warlords, assassins, and powerful people for decades. They are the kinds of characters who can change a situation with a glance rather than a word. However, it would be an injustice to condense his life into the sum of his most well-known parts. The narrative of Tagawa is a protracted confrontation with identity, opportunity, and consequence. A life spent between countries, where power is performed on screen while being sought after off. This depicts his early years, the decisions that influenced his career, the times that put him to the test, and the drawn-out, difficult process of self-reflection and reimagining. Roots and the sense of being in between. Tagawa was born in Tokyo, into a family that would travel back and forth between Japan and the United States, and he saw belonging as a fluid and frequently contentious concept. Due to his father's military duty in the United States, he had to relocate and was exposed at a young age to organizations that placed a high value on rank and role. He developed an early habit of observing and adjusting due to his upbringing in settings where identity changed based on location. He carried with him the feeling that he was neither totally one thing nor the other, not fully accepted in American mainstream culture and viewed as alien in Japan. It was a more subdued and possibly more damaging tale of deprivation, the ongoing awareness that you are always a little bit apart, no matter where you are. That sense of alienation served as a type of inspiration for a young guy who would later devote his life to embodiment and presence. Discipline was the first step in Tagawa's journey towards acting. He received technical tools and access to the film industry while studying theater at the University of Southern California, but he was not immediately accepted. For Tagawa, training was preparation, the refining of a voice, movement, and the emotional control that would become his hallmark on screen. While many actors utilize it as a launching pad for exposure, directors looking for credibility in fight scenes and action choreography found him appealing due to his experience in martial arts and physical conditioning. His command of quiet, however, was what set him apart from simple stunt work. He could retain an audience's attention with a single glance or completely change a scene with a single gesture. These were methods honed in rehearsals and evolved on stage. They were the result of craft and the antithesis of flashy. Early roles, little creativity, quick respect. Tagawa immediately gained recognition as an actor thanks to his early performances in films and television. Supporting parts in major action blockbusters and high-end films showed versatility and screen authority. However, Hollywood's creativity for Asian male actors remained constrained. Many of the roles that were presented to him were based on power without vulnerability, such as those of generals, criminal leaders, and individuals whose identities were defined by menace. He took on several of those responsibilities out of practicality more than conceit. For an actor, employment is important, and visibility can occasionally convert into opportunity. However, the distinction between character and stereotype became hazy, with frequent casting as types. Writers' and producers' perceptions of him were limited by the very traits that made him valuable in a casting room: authority, serene force, and mysterious gaze. Opportunities for depth were frequently overshadowed by the industry's desire for straightforward tropes. The impact of a single role and breakthrough Tagawa's public persona was shaped by his renowned portrayal as a shape-shifting villain, a sorcerer, and a charismatic and menacing performer. For many admirers, that portrayal is still definitive, and it became part of pop culture shorthand. In the world of genre circles, it garnered widespread notoriety and a sort of immortality. However, having such a defining role has drawbacks. It cemented his status as the quintessential antagonist and eventually reduced the range of roles he was given. Tagawa found himself back to a limited range of options, rather than becoming an actor who could be envisaged in different circumstances. The arrival of fame brought with it a limitation, setbacks in both private and public life. Human imperfection, marriage, and parenthood were all part of the private life that lay behind the work life. Tagawa experienced personal difficulties and issues that impacted his relationships and profession, just like many prominent celebrities. As new generations of actors debuted and industry interest shifted, there were periods of decreased prominence. Even still, those more subdued years were crucial. Reflection on prior choices and the disconnect between one's inner existence and public persona were compelled by time spent out of the spotlight. The subsequent work focused more on re-establishing a feeling of purpose than it did on recovering instant fame, spiritual pursuits, and rejuvenation. Later in life, Tagawa made decisions that shocked the public, yet seemed consistent with a man looking for his roots. He studied religion, embraced spirituality, and ultimately chose a course that changed his values. People who have seen him over the past few decades report that he takes moral obligations seriously and is more interested in serving others than in advancing his own interests. The change was an internal repositioning rather than a dramatic transformation to a performance-friendly look. He grew picky about the parts he played and more deliberate about the stories he connected with. Knowing that every decision would be evaluated against a lengthy career, Tagawa doubled down on presence and deliberate selection at an age when many artists slow down. Subsequent work and the legacy's extensive reach, a career can come full circle, as demonstrated by Tagawa's subsequent return to the role that made him famous. He returned to that post with a depth and maturity derived from decades of experience. Fans perceived a more complex character, someone who had lived, carried the scars of age, and understood how to use those scars in performance, rather than merely an echo of a younger antagonist. Beyond that well-publicized comeback, Tagawa's career encompassed a variety of voice acting, television, and film roles. He took involved in international projects, indie dramas, and genre films. In addition to his inherent power, his on-screen presence was still significant because he had mastered the art of matching quiet with presence, allowing a single glance or pause to perform the work of several conversation pages. Create and have an impact. Tagawa's acting style prioritized control. He rarely used flamboyance. Instead, he frequently used economy to create tension in his performances. Younger actors were impacted by this strategy, which established a standard for portraying enemies with dignity as opposed to caricature. When he was performing at his finest, the audience was able to sense the man's inner life, a man with priorities, regrets, and thoughts outside of the story. His work is cited by both fans and film students when talking about the effectiveness of stillness in acting. He illustrated how a scene's serene core could be more frightening or captivating than a flurry of action. His experience taught artists who want to last a long time to develop a presence that is more than just young. The battle for greater representation and the price of typecasting. Tagawa's professional background serves as a warning about structural constraints in the entertainment industry. Male Asian actors' options were limited to particular cliches for a large portion of Hollywood's recent history, although Tagawa made the most of these limitations and occasionally went above them. His experience demonstrates how industrial trends limit the narratives that are told about entire communities. As more complicated roles become accessible and discussions about representation get more in-depth, that reality has shifted in recent years. Nevertheless, Tagawa's body of work continues to serve as an illustration of both the skill that was there in earlier systems and the expenses those systems imposed. Final thoughts, acknowledgement, accountability, and what's left. 600 words. Hiroyuki Tagawa's life defies neat descriptions. He will always be seen by some viewers as the dominant antagonist whose silence causes anxiety. Others see him as an actor who has learnt the difficult lessons that sometimes go unnoticed. In any honest accounting, the messy human core, choices, repercussions, and the laborious process of repair is more important than the neat story of ascent and salvation. There is benefit in accepting responsibility and dignity in owning up to mistakes. It appears from Tagawa's latter years that he took that aspect of life seriously. The quiet years that followed public defeats can have the opposite effect of anesthesia as fame. They have the power to compel introspection and, occasionally, transformation. It is rarely up to one person to determine whether or not a life fully atones for past wrong. However, Tagawa appears to have embraced the lifelong practice of raising awareness, making reparations where appropriate, and leading a different life. In our culture, it is tempting to expect faultless heroes or to condemn flawed people to eternal shame. They are both reductive reactions. Holding people accountable, identifying harms, and monitoring whether they make progress towards restoration is a challenging but more beneficial approach. This intricacy is demonstrated by Tagawa's trajectory. He is a character that embodies both talent and flaw, power and fallibility. He is neither a complete saint nor monster. There are two things that younger actors might learn from his career. First, craft is important. Develop abilities that surpass fads. Generations have learned how power reads on screen without noise, thanks to Tagawa's dedication to technique and to playing a role with economy. Second, honesty is important. Decisions that appear private until they are not have the power to ruin a career. Private and public life are intertwined. One's off-camera activities frequently influence their on-screen possibilities. And lastly, the issue of legacy. Is legacy just a list of jobs, accolades, and box office successes? Or is it the culmination of the lessons a life imparted to others, the ways it advanced a skill, and the candor it offered regarding human frailty? It is necessary to read Tagawa's legacy in both registers. He helped develop an archetype in genre film and offered fans performances they would never forget. He also faced and overcame personal setbacks, and his subsequent decisions demonstrated a readiness to reevaluate priorities. Truth becomes sharper as one ages in the public eye. The elderly are frequently assessed as though they have only ever been what their most prominent public moment implied, whereas the young are given the benefit of the doubt. However, there are seasons in a complete life: mastery, failure, apprenticeship, and occasionally repair. Each of those seasons has been provided by Tagawa's arc. His story is judged by whether the entire book conveys a nuanced, sincere human story, rather than by the excellence of any one chapter. Ultimately, Cary-Hiroyuki Tagawa continues to be a study in contrasts: power and humility, visibility and seclusion, authority on film and searching off it. If nothing else, his life challenges us to consider the paradox that a person may create art that impacts millions of people while still struggling with their personal shortcomings. The most genuine stories can be discovered in that uncomfortable tension between brilliance and brokenness.